It's been the worst time of my life, Joe. If somebody accused me of raping them or hurting them, I have a 22-year-old daughter. I would never hurt anyone.
For 4 years, one of Hollywood's most reliable character actors couldn't get through a single day without wondering if the next headline would finally end everything he built. Not a headline about a new film. Not a headline about an award. A headline about a courtroom battle that had already outlived its own evidence, its own credibility, and its own legal standing, yet somehow refused to die. This is the story of how Clifton Powell, a man who appeared in over 100 films and television projects, nearly lost his career to a case that the courts ultimately threw out entirely. Powell's path to Hollywood was never an easy one. Born in southeast Washington, D.C., he grew up in a neighborhood shaped by poverty, violence, and limited opportunity. His mother died when he was only 4 years old, and he was raised by a father who battled alcoholism and struggled to provide the stability a young child needed. Powell has spoken in numerous interviews over the years about how many of his childhood friends never made it out of that environment, pulled instead into cycles of incarceration or worse. What separated him, by his own account, was a combination of discipline, mentorship, and a refusal to accept the streets as his final destination. That determination eventually carried him into acting, where his breakout came with the 1993 film Menace II Society, a gritty portrait of urban life that resonated because of its unflinching honesty. From there, Powell became one of the most dependable faces in black cinema, appearing in the Friday franchise, Rush Hour, Dead Presidents, and Why Do Fools Fall in Love? His performance as Jeff Brown, the road manager to Ray Charles, in the 2004 biopic Ray, earned him an NAACP Image Award nomination and placed him alongside Jamie Foxx's Oscar-winning portrayal at the center of one of the decade's most celebrated films. By any measure, Powell had done what few actors manage. He built a career spanning genres, decades, and audiences, all while maintaining the kind of steady, recognizable presence that directors and casting agents trusted again and again. But reputation, no matter how carefully built, can be threatened in an instant. In the late summer of 2011, a woman using the pseudonym Keontae Myers came forward with allegations against Powell stemming from an encounter in a New Orleans hotel room. According to her account, what began as consensual became something she said crossed a line when she asked it to stop, and in her telling, that request was ignored. Myers, who worked at the time as a cocktail waitress at Harrah's Casino, filed a complaint that quickly made its way into entertainment press coverage, with outlets like TMZ reporting the allegation in terms that left little room for the nuance such a serious claim actually required. Powell denied the accusation from the very beginning. Through his representatives, he issued a statement asserting that the claims were false and that he intended to pursue every legal avenue available to him. The original criminal investigation into the matter was ultimately dismissed for lack of evidence. But in the world of public perception, a dismissed criminal complaint does not erase a headline. Myers proceeded to file a civil suit against Powell, seeking damages in excess of $75,000, and it was this civil case, governed not by the criminal standard of proof beyond a reasonable doubt, but by the far lower civil threshold of a preponderance of the evidence, that would come to dominate the next several years of his life. This distinction matters enormously, and it's one that often gets lost when the public discusses celebrity legal battles. A criminal case requires near certainty of guilt. A civil case asks only whether something is more likely true than not. For any public figure, that lower bar creates a uniquely dangerous situation, because even an unproven allegation can inflict damage that a not guilty verdict never fully repairs. Powell understood this dynamic intimately. In interviews given years later, he explained that the hardest part of the ordeal was never really the legal process itself. It was watching people who once respected his work quietly decide, without a trial, without evidence, that he was guilty simply because the accusation existed. The professional consequences arrived almost immediately. Roles he had already secured started disappearing. Producers, wary of controversy attaching itself to their projects, grew hesitant to work with him. Powell has recounted one television role in particular where he expected to appear across 7 or 8 episodes, only to see his character quietly written out after the second, with no formal explanation offered beyond the unspoken understanding that his name had become, for the moment, a liability. In an industry built on image and audience trust, the mere existence of a lawsuit, regardless of its merits, was often treated as confirmation enough. What makes Powell's account particularly striking is how he described the emotional weight of that period. He has said publicly that the ordeal ranked among the most painful experiences of his life, comparable to the loss of his father years earlier. As a father himself, he explained that the accusations cut in a way that went beyond professional concern. He worried about how his own children would process headlines connecting his name to something so serious, regardless of whether it was true. He maintained his innocence throughout, but innocence, he later reflected, does little to shield a family from whispers, from strangers' sideways glances, from anonymous online commentary that had already rendered its verdict long before any court did. The civil case dragged on for 4 years. Lawyers filed motions, evidence was reviewed, and Powell's professional momentum, the very thing he'd spent nearly 2 decades building, sat in limbo. Finally, in 2017, the court dismissed the case, citing insufficient evidence to support the claims against him. A year later, in 2018, Powell's own countersuit for defamation and emotional distress was also dismissed, effectively closing the matter for good. On paper, it was a resolution. In practice, it left Powell in a strange and painful position, legally cleared, but not fully restored. The industry that had quietly distanced itself from him during the height of the controversy did not rush to make amends once the case was dismissed. Reputational damage, it turns out, doesn't reverse itself just because a judge signs an order. This is the deeper story beneath the headlines, not a story about guilt or innocence in a strict legal sense, but about what happens to a person's career and psyche when accusation and consequence become disconnected from due process. Powell has spoken candidly about how the industry operates on perception first and fact second, and how that reality disproportionately affects actors who don't have the institutional protection of a major studio contract or a powerful publicity apparatus behind them. For every year the case remained unresolved, Powell lost ground professionally that he could never fully reclaim, years he has described as simply gone, absorbed by a legal fight rather than by the work he'd spent his life mastering. It would be incomplete to tell this story without acknowledging the other pressures Powell has openly discussed navigating during roughly the same period. A costly divorce that he has said cost him millions of dollars, financial strain worsened by heavy gambling losses he estimated at tens of thousands of dollars annually, and his own admitted absence from his children's lives during years when his career demanded near-constant travel. Powell has never used these struggles as an excuse. If anything, he's used them as an explanation, offering audiences a rare level of candor about how success and personal unraveling can exist in the same life at the same time. He has spoken about the difference between being present financially and being present emotionally, admitting that providing for his family was never the same as actually being there for them. Layered atop all of this were the systemic barriers Powell has described facing throughout his career. Casting rooms where he says his skin tone was cited outright as a reason certain roles weren't available to him, language about market concerns that often concealed something far less neutral. These weren't isolated grievances, they were, in Powell's own telling, a consistent undercurrent running beneath even his most celebrated successes, including the NAACP Image Award nomination that validated his talent in a way the industry too rarely did on its own. What emerges from Powell's story isn't a simple narrative of scandal and redemption. It's something more complicated and in many ways more honest, a portrait of a man who survived a childhood few could imagine, built a career through sheer persistence, and then watched that career nearly unravel not because of a conviction, but because an allegation alone was enough to shift how an entire industry treated him. The courts eventually agreed there wasn't sufficient evidence to hold him legally responsible. But the years lost, the roles that disappeared, the trust that had to be slowly rebuilt, those don't come with a dismissal order. They're simply the cost Powell has said he carries, a quiet reminder that in Hollywood, sometimes the loudest verdict is the one delivered outside a courtroom altogether.